How can this country halt the decline of its unique biodiversity? 40% of our native birds are considered threatened or at risk of extinction. Native plants fare no better, and 85% of native lizards are threatened. New Zealand currently ranks worst in the United Nations for the protection of threatened species. More species are at risk of extinction here than any other nation. Marie Brown is a policy analyst for the Environmental Defence Society and one of the authors of a new book called Vanishing Nature. It's a comprehensive analysis of the state of New Zealand's biodiversity. In the book, a group of lawyers, policy analysts and ecologists argues that if we want to halt the loss of our native flora and fauna, we need to fundamentally rethink how we use nature. Marie is in our Auckland studio. Good morning.
Good morning, Catherine.
When we talk about the highest rate of threatened species in the world, is that because, as is often the case, we are fairly diligent at reporting and recording these things, or is it really that bad?
No, I think it's really that bad. In fact, we're not particularly good at reporting these things. And a lot of the species that we have on record are, in fact, what we call data deficient for the purpose of determining their conservation status, which means that we don't know enough about them to know whether they're threatened or at risk or absolutely secure.
What are the drivers? We know three of them well and truly for land species in particular: possums, rats and stoats. Are they the primary drivers to many species, and if not, what are the others?
The direct, as in the proximal drivers, are certainly pests are a big one. Habitat loss remains a concern, but there's also much deeper drivers, which is what we talk about in the book. We call them fundamental drivers, and that's the exclusion of the importance of biodiversity from our decision making. It's the power of private interests, and it's our failure to acknowledge just how dependent we are on nature.
Could you elaborate on the first two in the first instance?
Yeah, so the exclusion of biodiversity from decision making is it kind of means that you can lose a lot of biodiversity in a transaction in the market, and it's not reflected in the price on either side. And that means that the degradation of natural capital is kind of borne by society as opposed to the person who's degrading it or the organisation that's degrading it. The power of private interests essentially means that private users of natural resources tend to exert an awful lot of pressure, and they manage to avert regulatory approaches, so they stop laws being strong enough and then they stop them being implemented as well. And we see this in biodiversity, we see this in climate change. It's nothing new, but it is a key driver of biodiversity loss. And our argument in Vanishing Nature is that although we've done a lot of really good stuff about addressing the proximal drivers of decline, which are the pests and habitat loss, we haven't really nailed these key underlying issues, and that's the reason that the numbers are still going backwards.
So number one, number two, and the third one you mentioned?
The third one is that we don't acknowledge our dependencies on nature enough. So we don't acknowledge just how important nature and nature's services are to what we do.
So what are you saying? Are you going the route of the Pavan Sukhdevs of the world, which says start putting a dollar value on the services of your systems and of your ecosystems, because that's the only way you're going to compete with these other forces, the only way you're going to compete with businesses and organisations wanting to make use of nature, is to put up a dollar value?
It's really hard to convert the value of natural capital into something recognisable as financial capital, and so there's enormous technical constraints around doing that, and it's a very kind of loaded conversation that the value of nature is difficult to reflect in price in most cases. So
he's finding a way of doing it, though. He's bringing an economist's mind to say, we get trillions of dollars of services out of trees, for example. We get X amount out of water. And I know that it sometimes sits as some sort of sacrilege, but if you are seriously trying to argue with a government why more of the public purse ought to go the way of conservation, is that a way that you are seeing as being a way forward or not?
I think it's a really important route to get some better movement around biodiversity protection, and we've seen it used in the sense of, say, wetland drainage and costing the values of a wetland for absorbing flood events and runoff and that kind of stuff. So it is used. I guess we draw the distinction in Vanishing Nature between valuation and commodification. They're actually two different things, but I think valuation of nature's services are critical because you're speaking the same language of degradation. So I would advocate for a careful use of that approach. it's not appropriate in all instances, particularly because the intrinsic values of nature are quite hard to cost. They're so valuable, they're invaluable, and if you go to a process where you're strictly accounting for nature, then their value then becomes zero instead of infinite.
How do you? I understand. How do you do a valuation then that doesn't lead to the risk of commodification? Although goodness knows discussions around water right now, which already has trading rights upon it, and great demands upon it, right really at the heart of some of what we're talking about right here. How do you do a valuation that doesn't speak the language of the economists and speak the language of those in charge of the public purse?
It's hard to control the use of a tool once it's there. And there could be
used and abused, is what you're saying.
Well, that's right. It could be perverse consequences of introducing it, even in good faith from the perspective of a policymaker. We need to be careful the extent to which we boil it down. On the other hand, the counterfactual is that these values and these services are left out of the decision, which doesn't work either. So it's the proverbial rock in a hard place. But I think there's huge scope to use those sorts of accounting frameworks to help towards conservation, but I think we need to do that keeping in mind that there's a lot that's going to be left out of those equations, even with the best intentions.
What is the fundamental rethink you call for then? Because some of these are old stories. We know that DOC has its list of endangered species, threatened species, and we know that just about every time it reports, it's struggling to keep up. In fact, it's not keeping up with its targets. We also know it's responsible for a third of the country land-wise. We know what it's trying to do with pest control. We know about the initiatives with offshore sanctuaries and some on-land sanctuaries. We know about the public and the private interests fighting the good fight. So if that's the existing setting here, what are you saying the fundamental rethink needs to be?
So I don't know that we use the word fundamental rethink. However, it is quite an important conclusion of the book is that we need to change our economic systems so that they incentivise conservation and they penalise degradation. So what we argue in Vanishing Nature is that we do loads of pest control, and in fact not nearly enough. However, we do an awful lot. We do have laws in place and we do have dedicated conservation agencies. But there's much more that needs to be done to alter those underlying drivers so that they push us towards what we call prosperity building actions. So we link the intactness of our natural systems to our fundamental prosperity. In fact, we say they're one and the same. So our fundamental rethink, if you're to call it that, is about altering our economic systems and engaging the public in a way that mobilises us towards a sustainable future. So that's a sort of a lot of arm waving at this point. So do you
get more specific? Give me some examples of some specific ideas for trying to do that.
Yeah, sure. So the really great thing about New Zealand is that we've been at conservation for a long time, and there's a lot of really good models and good thinking out there. So it was very important for us to convey those, what you say, old stories, because what it demonstrates is that there's a public appetite for the protection of nature in New Zealand and that we're not at ground zero. So it was really important to not be seen in the book to be saying, oh, we're not doing anything, because that you're going to lose a lot of people who are already doing the good work by saying that. In terms of the fundamental rethinks, we think there needs to be a much stronger focus on public engagement and public leadership. So, and that means supporting things like community groups, supporting our agencies to do what they're meant to do in terms of statute, so loads more funding to DOC and all of that sort of stuff. But then on the economic front, we recommend what we call an environmental consumption tax and rebate system, which would see degradation of natural capital as being framed as it should be, as a cost, instead of society bearing the cost.
Like a pollution tax, only it's a what would you call it? A degradation tax?
Yeah, well, it's a degradation of natural capital. I'm sure you could call it any number of things, but the basic premise of it would be that you would tax people for doing prosperity damaging actions. But the important thing would be that you would couple that with a rebate system, whereby that money could then be redistributed to those that are doing the right thing.
So it essentially is a pollution tax, right?
It's a carrot and a stick approach, yeah. But the rebate system is a critical component of it.
So the rebate system, once the tax is taken from the polluter, which is a concept that's been around for a while.
That's right. Yeah.
The rebate system means it goes where?
Well, the rebate system would mean that those that were doing positive things for conservation could have the cost of that
Right.
returned to them. So that at the moment, conservation is what we call a discretionary cost. You know, it's something that you do if you can, and society sees it that way, and at the level of the individual, we see it that way.
So basically, it's a tax break is what you're talking about for conservation work.
I think in the very practical setting, as it applies to the individual, that's exactly how it would appear.
What you will often hear, though, however, whenever these sorts of systems are brought in, tax break systems, is that inevitably people quite experienced in the field find ways of doing the minimum, claiming the break, and it's superficial. And this is often the case that comes even with, we're talking about R&D today, R&D investments. That's often a debate about whether people are very cleverly known to do just enough in order to get a rebate for something they would have done already. How deeply have you gone into how such a system could work? Is it working in other countries?
Such a system would require an awful lot of background work to get some legs under it, and we don't deny that in Vanishing Nature. This is a big deal. It's a strategic shift. We envision that it would result in less tax on the production of private wealth. So it would actually result in a tax shift away from income, company tax, capital gains tax, that sort of thing, and it would shift to activities instead that consume public wealth. So this is a fundamental shift. It's not about allowing the individual to claim back on the tax from the plants they plant on their stream. This is much bigger than that. Although we do support the tax breaks for private conservation.
Who would administer it? Who would determine what is and what isn't attracting the tax or attracting the rebate?
I quite imagine it would be nested in Treasury with contributions from Department of Conservation, Ministry for the Environment. I would imagine it would need to sit across a number of ministries because it's a relatively complex system to implement. It would need the participation of the Crown Research Institutes in terms of having enough information and acquiring the right scientific information to underpin such a system. So we're talking about a fairly big program here, but what it does, hopefully, is that it illustrates that some of the things that we accept don't have to be that way. We invented the tax system and we can change it.
Good talking to you. Thank you.
No problem.
Marie Brown, one of the authors of Vanishing Nature, the EDS, the Environmental Defence Society book.